A lot of people fall for easily debunked propaganda when it comes to self-defense gun use in America. And when I say people, I really just mean ammosexuals and those who lack the intellectual curiosity to fact-check things. Research has shown over and over that there are not millions of self-defense gun uses in the United States each year. In fact, Harvard has an entire website dedicated to self-defense gun use on their public health website. And when they look at the actual evidence, they find that there is no support for this concept of millions of self-defense gun uses each year. In fact, their researchers have shown that less than 1% of crime is stopped by a good guy with a gun. So if not based in reality, where does that 2 million number come from? Well, to understand that, let's look at a paper by a former colleague of mine called Armed Resistance to Crime, the Prevalence and Nature of Self-Defense with a Gun. This article is the most cited article by the NRA today when it comes to self-defense gun use, where in this paper he makes the claim that 2.5 million people have used a gun in self-defense. I want to point out that this paper was published in 1995. Now, not only is this paper really outdated, despite still being used by the NRA today, there are some fundamental methodological issues with this paper. To begin with, he doesn't use actual data to understand self-defense gun use. Instead, he creates a survey that he sent out to 6,000 people, and in that survey, his only question to get at self-defense gun use is, have you ever felt like you used your gun in self-defense? It focuses on feelings, not reality. And Dr. Gary Kleck has been called out repeatedly for this, using that feelings idea for his questioning. And he's been asked at conferences, hey, couldn't there be a situation where you're walking down the street and someone else is walking down the street towards you and you scream, I've got a gun, and that person leaves? Couldn't you say that you felt like you used your gun in self-defense? And he admits, yeah, that could happen. But that's not the only methodological flaw in this paper. In this paper, Gary Kleck admits, hey, I sent this out to 6,000 people, but the vast majority of people did not use a gun in self-defense. So what he does then is he takes half the people who actually said they did not use the gun in self-defense and throws them away. Then he keeps all the people who said they did use a gun in self-defense. This overinflates the power of people who used a gun in self-defense and diminishes the results of those who did not. This is a form of selection bias, and he is now making the sample give him the result that he wants to get. That is not credible science. And even some of the scientists who work for these 2A think tanks have called Gary Kleck out for this survey design, saying you have drastically overinflated and overestimated the number of people who use a gun in self-defense. And we'll talk about their numbers in a second. But if that 2 million is not accurate, what is the real number? Well, we actually have data for that. In a study published last year on levels and changes in defensive firearm use by U.S. crime victims, we actually get an idea of how many people use a gun for self-defense. This study uses the National Crime Victimization Survey, a survey put together using police reports to look at victims who used a gun to defend themselves. And they found what we've always known, what Harvard has shown on their website over and over, that the average is between 61,000 and 65,000 a year. This study also breaks these numbers down by violent crime and by property crime so that people can see where it kind of plays out. But what did the gun researchers who work for the 2A think tanks who called out Gary Kleck say? What did they come up with? They make the argument that some crimes are underreported, like assault and rape, and so that for those cases, we should take the percent that's underreported and apply that to gun ownership and self-defense, and that would give us a higher number. And that takes us to like 125,000 uses a year, but that leads us back to... It's also really important to point out that the vast majority of those unreported assaults and robberies that are stopped by self-defense gun use are actually stopped by criminals preventing other criminals from victimizing them. So really, it's about bad guys with a gun stopping another bad guy with a gun, not a good guy with a gun stopping a bad guy. The problem with the false positive. So yeah, using feelings to understand self-defense gun use is not a reliable method. It would be the same as me saying I only got out of my speeding ticket because I showed the officer my lucky coin.